Okay, welcome to tonight's extraordinary meeting of Middlesbrough Council. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence.
If we could just carry those over from the previous meeting, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can we agree that? Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any? Agenda item 3, extraordinary meeting. I believe you were the lead writer of this letter, Councillor Hubbard. I invite you to open the meeting.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's important to clarify to the full Council that the decision to close the Southland Centre was carried out under flawed processes. Sadly for the residents of Middlesbrough, this is a recurring theme for too many a year now, and the continuation of such actions causes reputational damage to the town, results in qualification of the Council's annual statement of accounts, fails in most cases to obtain value for money for the assets being sold, and can come at great cost to the taxpayers. The process and governance failings have been highlighted by Councillor Rathmell at the call-in on the 11th of May of this year, when Labour councillors still took the decision to close the Southlands despite compelling evidence. Since that meeting, more important information has come to light, information that this council and its officers should have been made aware of. There's a covenant on the land introduced by the late Colonel James Penniman in 1950. The covenant was revised in 2011, in which the ownership stands with the Football Foundation. The covenant clearly states the land is protected until 2032 and needs written consent from the Football Foundation for any changes other than what the site is currently being used for. This information has never formed part of any decision-making process in relation to the Southland Centre. So, did the officers know, and did they decide to withhold this information from the decision makers? Or didn't the officers know? And if not, why not? Surely such searches form part of basic due diligence checks. Senior officers of this council are wanting to close the Southlands, they state, to save money. But they have failed to factor in anywhere in their calculations the following costs. The all-weather pitch could possibly have to be built elsewhere at a cost of around £1 million. The demolition of the building is estimated at £600,000. The cost of moving businesses to new locations will be £200,000 plus. So the cost to the taxpayer in Middlesbrough could be around £1.8 million. That is not including the cost of the new community hub, which has to be mentioned. Despite requests information as to where this money will come from and where it is actually to be located, no information has been forthcoming from council officers. Therefore, it sits alongside a list of schemes that have failed to materialise, such as the Sugar Cube and the Toaster at Middlehaven, the glass dome over the quadrangle at the Town Hall, and the casino. All viable in their day, all shelved at great cost to the taxpayers of Middlesbrough. Businesses located within the Southlands asked the council to loan them £1.7 million to repair and refurbish the centre in order to keep it open. The businesses would of course repay that money back to the council. They then wanted to remain in the centre where they had built their businesses. They wanted to improve the leisure side of the centre too. The total cost to the council for their proposal was £0. However, the Labour administration of this council have chosen a route where the taxpayers will have to cough up a potential £2 million. Not a smart move, but one that has become an all too familiar pattern in Middlesbrough. There's a leaflet currently being distributed by Middlesbrough Labour councillors which states that the independent ward councillors are against the new community hub. This is an untruth peddled by Labour, a total myth. Independent ward councillors have asked for details as to the new location and the money that will be set aside, and until that information is known, then we believe it is right to continue to fight to save what we already have. The leaflet also mentions that the Southlands is crumbling. Now there's an admission from Middlesbrough Labour in writing to the residents. It was the only refreshing part on the leaflet in which Labour now admit their own failure to maintain the building, the engine room of East Middlesbrough. That probably wasn't the message they hoped to achieve, but it is the one the residents have clearly picked up on. We've heard that the new community hub will not be built for at least 3 years. This is totally unacceptable, but again, not an unfamiliar practice, as this will resonate with anyone from the community of Winniebanks. And I will open the meeting across the council chamber for debate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, looks like nobody else wishes to... Oh, Councillor Walker.
Sorry, Chair. I was just looking up the figure because I want... it's obviously to give accurate information to the council. Could I speak just briefly first in response to Mrs Wood's presentation of the petition, and thank her again for handing it in. I'd like to point out the council did try over a 2-year period to find a viable solution to keep Southlands open. But it did become clear that the size and the condition of the former school building was against it, and such a solution could not be found. Touching on Councillor Hubbard's point, and it is, I'm taking the figure from the report, the cost was estimated over a 10-year period to be 450,000 to 652,000 over a 10-year period. And even at the end of that 10-year period, the 1.7 million referred to would not have been paid back. If the payments had been kept up, it would not have been paid back. I think it was still leaving about half of that money underspent. However, the council has recognised that there's a need for a community facility, and the executive felt quite strongly about that. A community facility in East Middlesbrough which is fit for purpose. And so the decision included not only the closure of the Southland Centre, but the provision of a new fit for purpose community facility in East Middlesbrough. Now, Councillor Hubbard's mentioned about we haven't said where that is, and no, we haven't. And I was very open at the meeting I attended at the Southland Centre that we wouldn't say where it is, because it's as part of the consultation, we want to take a steer from the community on that. So it would have been wrong of us to have had a decision in April saying this is where it's going to be. So that is why, and that information has been given to council before, that we haven't said exactly where it's going to be, other than it'll be in East Middlesbrough. Turning to Mrs Wood's comments on the activities, I hope that Mrs Woods will feed into that consultation the sort of activities that she would like to see in that centre. And it's also relevant that officers are currently engaging with those community users of the Southlands, finding them alternative premises, which could be permanent or could be in the interim until the new facility is provided, so that those current community facilities can continue. The aim was not to cease all the community facilities that take place in Southlands. I will say that some of them, it is important that they take place in that location. I think some of the things that Mrs Woods takes part in, it is important because it's the local community that actually use them. For other activities, they could take place somewhere in Middlesbrough. Some of the groups aren't even from Middlesbrough, where they're running regional events. But some of them, it's for a broader Middlesbrough public, and it doesn't have to be actually in that location. So whilst I fully appreciate, and I think I said this at the meeting at Southlands, the great affection that some people have for a building where they've attended for many years. Firstly, we had tried to find a viable solution, and secondly, what we actually need to do is to provide something that's not just fit for this generation, but for generations to come. And even if the money was spent on Southlands, Chair, in 10, 20 years' time, I think we'll be looking at it again. It is quite an old building, and it wasn't designed as a community facility. To turn to Councillor Hubbard's point on the covenant. Firstly, the Football Foundation, if I heard you wrong, Councillor Hubbard, I do apologise. I think you said the ownership stands with the Football Foundation. That's not correct. And if you read the covenant, it's quite clear that not the ownership, because as you're probably aware, there's not really a concept of ownership in the property. The freehold is held by Middlesbrough Council. It is true with a covenant on it, the purpose of which is to protect the football pitches and the investment of the Football Foundation in those football pitches, that we cannot dispose of our interest in the land without their written agreement. There is a supposition then that they wouldn't agree. Now, I think there's a difference between Middlesbrough Council, if we were going to look to dispose of the land, and stress again, we hadn't got to that stage, if indeed we are going to at all, doing something related to the pitches and proposing something in relation to land that has nothing to do with the pitches. The reason why all the land is included is that's what's on the land registry, the whole of the land. In order to split it up, you would have to register, I understand you'd have to register the land separately. So, whilst, yes, written agreement would be required, we've got no reason to suppose that the Football Foundation wouldn't come to a reasonable agreement with us. That process has not started because, again, I'm sorry to sound like a record that's stuck, we haven't started the disposal of the land. That was made clear in the report. It was in paragraph 32. The reason I know that is because I've had to refer to it that many times. What was said in the report is dispose anything in relation to a report in relation to the options for the future of the land will come to a meeting by September 2018. I don't know what's going to be in that report, but what I do know is that it's at the stage where we would look at land disposal, if we get to that stage, that we would start to look at covenants on the land and other things such as right-of-way. So the reason that officers might not have been aware of that particular covenant, as I wasn't, was because we hadn't started to look at the disposal of the land. I'm sorry if that sounds like a very simple principle, but it happens to be the fact. We were aware of the restriction on the football pitches, but the thing is, we haven't been. The decision regarding Southlands did not involve the football pitches. The decision around Southlands was the future of the operational use of a building, not about the land. I will say we have, but sorry, not me personally, but officers have been in conversation with the Football Foundation about the implications of the closure of the building on the football pitches, for example, regarding the toilets. And I can give an assurance that we will certainly look to comply with whatever the Football Foundation's wishes are in that respect. Having said that, we don't need the Football Foundation's permission to close the building, which is the decision that was made in April this year. I should also make the point, Chair, that the decision made in April this year, after 2 years of attempts to keep the building open, was also the subject of a scrutiny call-in. It was also the subject, Southlands also the subject of the scrutiny call-in in 2017, so there has been quite a lot of scrutiny on it. At the scrutiny call-in, it was claimed, the most recent one, it was claimed that there hadn't been sufficient consultation, although no or very little evidence was given to that effect by the people who called in. So I was quite happy, and I mention this because it was in the papers for tonight, to actually give some detail of the extensive consultation that has taken place. And I can't read through it all because I haven't got time. There's about 27 different instances over about an 8-month period of where there was engagement with various stakeholders, whether some of it was answering questions, some of it was working parties, some of it was just meeting with stakeholders. So it is not true to say that there hasn't been sufficient consultation, and indeed there is consultation ongoing. I believe I might have covered Councillor Hubbard's point on the £200,000 it's going to cost to relocate. Well, we've got a budget of £100,000 for that, up to £100,000, and that was in the report. Just again to mention the value for money, that was not saying, and it's been made very clear by audit, that the council did not receive value for money in the sense of the monetary value for assets. They have said that when I've been at corporate affairs. It's in relation to the government's arrangements, or it was. And of course I would urge Councillor Hubbard to read the latest report that has come out from our external auditors on that. I believe I have covered everything, Chair. I just would like to make one other point. And I would like to say this is not in relation to members of the public who have got an interest in our community facility. And it's in reference to members. And I do think that throughout this, that the behaviour towards officers of some members, not all, of some members, has been nothing less than deplorable, Chair. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rathmell.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pick up on some of the points that have been raised, and it's quite interesting. I appreciate what Councillor Walker's saying. A decision to close the centre wasn't made until earlier this year, and they were aware of the covenant prior to that, but actually forgot to include it in some of the reports. Oh, sorry, it was omitted from all of the reports, including the one that went to the Executive Subcommittee for Property in September last year. That was following the 4 months discussion with a private bidder, with a possibility and a view to offloading the freehold of the site. I'm just wondering then, Councillor Walker, yes, you decided this year to close it, but you were having chats between July and September last year to sell the site, potentially, and you were meant to report back to the executive in November last year, but that got pulled from the report with no mention. At what point was due diligence going to kick in? And you actually think, I know, I'll look at the site that we're trying to get rid of. Can you explain that? Thank you.
I'm afraid this isn't really a question and answer session between two councillors. So I understand you've raised some concerns, but I would not expect Councillor Walker to come back in a dialogue. I will give, don't get me wrong, Councillor Walker will be given the opportunity to address any issues that are raised, but I'm not going to have a dialogue between two councillors in the chamber. And I would remind members that please, if you want to raise anything or say any comments, please do it through the chair. Any further people wish to contribute to the debate? Okay, right, what I'll do now, I would normally just go to Councillor Hubbard to sum up, but as Councillor Rathmell has raised one or two specifics that he thinks Councillor Walker will know the answers to, I will invite Councillor Walker to come back in, then I'll be going straight to Councillor Hubbard to sum up. Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. By saying that something has been omitted from a report, the implication is that a particular officer writing the report had that information. As I have explained, that we would tend to look at covenants and other issues with the land when we started the disposal process. We hadn't got to that stage. My information is that the officer who wrote the report did not, the officers who were responsible for this report, did not, whilst being aware of the restriction of regarding the football pitches, which were not the subject of the decision in April this year, were not aware of the covenant because we hadn't got to the asset disposal stage. So I believe, Chair, that saying somebody's omitted something is quite a serious allegation. Regarding the freehold, yes, there was somebody. And I have to go back in my dates, so forgive me, Councillor Rothman, because I'd have to go back to my papers again, because there has been quite a few dates on this. But there was, the Executive Subcommittee actually rejected a proposal from a third party who wanted to take the freehold of the land. And one of the key reasons was because of that very reason, because that third party could not guarantee the continued use of Southlands as an enterprise centre and wanted the freehold, so it meant it could have been technically sold off at any time. However, because we were rejecting that, we hadn't got to the asset disposal stage, so that is why we hadn't started to look at any covenants on the land. And I will say the covenant on the land is not a covenant that says you only can use the land for this purpose or you can't use the land for that purpose. It is a covenant that says we would have to seek the agreement of the Football Foundation, and the advice I've been given is that it's unlikely for that to be reasonably withheld. Okay.
Chair, point of order, please.
No,
just a right of correction. I'm perfectly entitled. With regards to the business disposal case, it's actually in your own asset disposal policy that you took 90 seconds to consider last year. And it actually
Councillor-
requires a business disposal case when you decide in the future of a centre site or council building. I think deciding whether you keep
Councillor,
it open
I'm not
or
letting you
closed
have a
is
speech. You've
decided
had
in the
one
future.
chance on your feet.
It's right
Please
to reply.
don't. It isn't a right of reply, Councillor.
Can you tell me
I
which
give
part?
you the courtesy of allowing Councillor Walker. I would normally only let Councillor Walker speak once, but because you specifically asked a question of her rather than going through the chair, I gave her the opportunity to respond. I've told you already, we are not having a dialogue. Each member in this chamber, when anything is being discussed or debated, has one chance on the feet. You don't come back for the second chance. Nobody else has indicated they wish to speak. I'll now invite Councillor Hubbard to bring the meeting to a close. Councillor Hubbard.
Councillor Rathmore is totally correct about the business disposal case. All this information is going to the auditors, so I think they'll be very interested indeed in tonight's findings. Councillor Walker said about what would happen if the payments hadn't been kept up. But what proof does the council have that the payments wouldn't be kept up by the businesses? Did they take that into the same consideration when they loaned £6 million for a hotel? Did they take that into account? The businesses are only asking for 1.7 million. I should have been a doctor. I can't understand half these things I've wrote here. Councillor Walker also states in 20 years' time, if we put the money into the Southlands, it might be money that's not well spent. Well, we've heard tonight, how old is this building? You've just spent £8 million into it. Age has nothing to do with it. It's whether it's viable, whether it's fit and proper. I mentioned about the £200,000 possible to relocate the businesses. We know that you've only got £100,000 set aside, and that was the exact point we were making. You're actually looking at now to relocate 8 businesses into Nature's World, and you're going to have to redo a dilapidated building there, and that's going to cost at least £100,000. That's going to take the whole budget up straight away. And finally, I'm really insulted actually, where you've said that officers have been treated deplorable by members. We've got a standards procedure if that's the case, and if that's happened, the officers should be using that system. And remarks like that doesn't do the councillor or this council any good at all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. That being the conclusion of the extraordinary meeting, I'd like to bring this meeting to a close. Thank you for your attendance and wish you all a safe journey home. Good night.